Well, kia ora koutou, no mai, haere mai. Welcome, everybody. Today I'm going to be presenting to you. I'm Jane McLennan, and I've been working at Farm Focus for a couple of years now. I'm actually a dairy farmer, though, in Greytown. I'm privileged enough to have Nicola with me. Nicola is one of our superstars from the customer success team. She'll be here monitoring the chat box for us and coordinating the Q&A session at the end. Well, the aim of today's webinar is to better understand your Farm Focus reports and how they can help your business. The webinar will run for about 55 minutes and will be recorded for future reference. If you've got any questions or concerns throughout the webinar, please use the chat box. Now, I know you're aware that Farm Focus is more than just compliance. There are some incredible reports within Farm Focus. But what I find gutting is the number of our farmers that are spending time coding their invoices consistently and correctly, but they're not accessing our reports and therefore not getting the most out of Farm Focus. And we want to change that. The reports provide added value because they turn that raw data that you've coded when you've entered your invoices into something more insightful and meaningful by undertaking a whole lot of calculations in the background. That means you can't break the reports in Farm Focus. You're not changing any of the data you've entered, just the way you're viewing it. So to get the most out of Farm Focus, you do need to get a few basics correct. And that's what I want to cover first. So I'm now going to move to our demonstration database. And I'm going to take my picture away. So the first thing we need to do is ensure that your code structure is correct. To get our code structure, we go into settings here, farm codes, settings, codes, farm codes. Now, with our farm codes, there's the section level, we've got our category level and our extended code level. Now, while you can customize your category and extended code level, your section level should look like something like this. That is because we want your income minus your expenses equal your net income. And our other words for net income are gross farm revenue or total farm income. Then from your net income, you minus your farm expenditure and you're left with your farm surplus. Now, your farm surplus is an important metric. It tells you how much money the farm makes without being distorted by the ownership structure. From our farm surplus, we minus our interest and rent, and we're left with our operating surplus, which is basically your taxable profit. It's what your accountant will use as a guide to calculating your tax. From your operating surplus, you minus your other, and you're left with your financial year surplus. Your other is made up of drawings, principal repayments, tax, and any capital expenditure. So if your section level code structure doesn't look like this, don't worry, it is easy to fix up, but I haven't got time to cover that this afternoon. But if you go down here into the Help Centre and search up farm codes, there is a resource there that will help you do that. So while we're in sections, what I'd like to do is have a quick look at our one of our stock codes, because at the bottom of any of our stock codes, you'll find your percent yield. Now, the percent yield in Farm Focus converts all your stock events to, say, from carcass weight in your reports to carcass weight in your reports, regardless of whether you enter them in as live weight or carcass weight. So if you're new to Farm Focus, then your percent yield will be entered. But if you've been with us for a long time, do come and check that you've got a percent yield. Now, if you haven't got a percent yield, just come into our Help Centre resource here and search under carcass weight yield, and our guide for all the yields will appear. Now, don't forget too, if you've got high yielding stock, you can also edit the yields as well. So the next part of having great reports is having consistent coding. We've got lots of codes in lots of tools in Farm Focus, like coding rules, bulk coding, merging, to ensure you code consistently. Please use them. And when you code your livestock invoices, adopt the philosophy, take a sec to check. There is so much valuable information in those livestock invoices that needs to be captured to get the most out of some of your reports. Also add meaningful descriptions and quantities when you've got them. That way, when you look back at your report in, say, 3 years' time, you'll know what you're talking about. And finally, we need to ensure that we enter some basic physical farm data into Farm Focus. I want to quickly show you that now. So under Settings, Farm Business, if you scroll to the bottom, please ensure you enter your farm's effective farm area. That's if you want Farm Focus to calculate things like your expenses per hectare. Also, under Settings, Production, please enter some livestock weights. Now enter the opening and closing values. Oh, sorry, I meant livestock values. Please enter the opening and closing livestock values. These are used in some of our reports to show an adjustment in revenue due to your closing numbers differing to your opening numbers. Now remember, revenue includes money in the bank and money in the paddock, i.e. our stock. Now in the demo, we leave these opening and closing values the same. This means if there is no change in stock quantity at the end of the financial year, there'll be no adjustment. But if you want to demonstrate a change due to the schedule changing during the year, then you need to enter a different closing value. Now remember, your closing numbers are always post-aging, and that's why we don't have any lambs or calves in these values. Now I have used national average market value from the IRD, but you can use true market value if you wish. It's up to you. You also too need to add your livestock weights. Use your own farm weights, because these weights are used to calculate your true kilograms of carcass weight you produce on your farm. So now we've got the basics correct, let's take a look at our reports. Well, our reports can be found here in the navigation bar. I can use this arrow to show you. I'm going into reports. The first report I'm going to look at is the cash flow detail report. Oh, it's playing it. Now, the cash flow detail report shows the details and assumptions behind your cash flow. Like the majority of our reports, when you first select the report, a modal will appear. And this is where you set the parameters of what you want to see. First of all, you need to select your data source. You've got 3 options. You can select the actual and plan, and here you'll get your actuals to a certain date and then your plan for the rest of the financial year. But what you will need to do is select the month you want your actuals to finish and your plan to start, and that is your revision month. Next, you could select your actuals, and that's obviously just your actual data, or you could select a plan, and that could be a scenario plan, a what if I bought the neighbour's block, or a baseline plan. If you select a plan, you need to select the year and then also the plan. So in some of our reports, you can view them by a specific date range, whereas others you view by a full financial year. You also get the option in some of our reports to view by payment date or accrual view. Now, if you view by payment date, it shows when the money hits your bank account. And if you view by accrual view, you view the report by invoice or event date. So I'm going to set the modal now so that we're going to look at actuals from last financial year, and then I'm going to apply. Now, with all our reports, or most of our reports, we get these chevrons here. This is, using these, I can collect this report up to a section level or a category level or extended code level. And in this report, I get an additional chevron here because it's the detail report. And if I click on that, I get my report to a coded line level. So I'm going to collapse this report right up. And now you can see why the structure at the section level is so important. I can quickly see at this level with this report, my net income from a cash perspective is nearly $750,000. In all our reports too, we have icons. The first icon here is my settings icon. So I can use this to change the parameters of what I want to see if I like. Next, I've got my filter icon. And this is where I can view the report either by code, by bank account, or by tag. Now, if I view it by code, for example, I could select just to see my purchases and apply. And now I'm only going to see my information on my purchases. We've also got this icon here. So when you print the report, you can have the font at small, medium, or large. And of course, there's the print or download as a PDF icon here. So the detail or the level of detail that you see here is what would print or download. And also to be aware, we've filtered this report now. To get rid of the filter, I could come back into the icon here and deselect it, or we've got this ability here to just use this cross button and we come out of the filter and view the full report. Now, finally, we have our view icon. And the view icon's used to identify what columns you want to view, and you turn your columns on or off depending on your requirements. So as a sheep and beef farmer, I'm usually interested in the detail of my sales and purchases of livestock. So I like to have my livestock columns on. I like to have my quantity or my head column on, my carcass weight per head, my dollar value per head, and my dollar value per kilogram of carcass weight. Now, I also like to have my additional notes on so that I can have all my assumptions on if I've entered any, and also I like to view it at to the cents level, and then I press apply. Now, this is where you're rewarded with entering all that quality detail. Because I'm going to go down here and just focus in on my lamb sales. And now you can see all this really valuable, rich data about all my lamb sales for the last financial year. Now, I also like to use this report for problem solving or investigating issues. For example, I was recently asked, how many bales of baleage did we purchase last financial year? And if I ever want to find out information like that, I come straight into the cash flow report. I'd come over here to where I can filter. And because I'm looking at baleage purchased, it's going to be a farm expense. So I'd go into my farm expenses here, select feed purchased and apply. And now I can quickly see that last financial year we purchased 50 bales of hay. They cost $120 each at a cost of $6,000. So once again, I'm rewarded by entering that quality information. If I hadn't entered the quantities when I was coding this invoice for baleage, I wouldn't be able to go back later and find out exactly how many bales I bought last year and at what cost. So the next report I want to show you is the variance report. Now, our variance report is one of my go-to reports because it allows me to compare two sets of data. So when I set this model up, I have to select the two data sets I wish to compare. So so how do I use this report? Well, at the end of the financial year, I would always compare my this year's actuals to my previous year's actuals. So what I would do in column A is put my this year's actuals, and in column B, I'd put my previous year's actuals. And then I would apply. And now you can see here in column A, I've got my actuals for this year. In column B, I've got my actuals from the previous year. Over here, I've got the difference or the variance between column A and column B. And in this final column here, I've got my percent variance or difference. Now you'll see I also have the dollar value on and the quantity on. Now I personally find having the quantity on too noisy to analyze this report. So I come along here to my view icon and I turn my quantity column off. Now, if I was wanting to compare the difference in my stock quantities, then I would clearly have it on. Now, with this report, like most of the reports, I actually like to first, when I analyze this report, collapse it up to this high level. And once again, I'm quickly rewarded with some amazing data. I can quickly tell here that my net income from this year is less than last year. In fact, it's 163k less, or 18% less. So in other words, in the 23-24 year, my net income was 18% less than the 22-23 year. Now you can look at your percentages or your actual numbers. Personally, I prefer to focus on my actual numbers because I can find the percent sometimes can be misleading. You can have a huge percent difference, but the actual difference is quite small. So I personally focus on this column, but it's up to you. And then what I would do in this report is then look at more of the detail. So I'll draw in here, say, and look at my expenses. And what I'll do is just simply run my eye down the variance and look for the greatest variance. Like even right here, this is telling me that I spent nearly 74, or I spent 74 less K this year than last year on my wages. And if I want to drill into why that is, I would then come along here using my drop down arrows, taking it down to my extended code level, and I can quickly see that my major difference in wages was because I didn't have any contract wages last year. And I can further carry on looking at this, and here you can see this is a negative number, so this is telling me I paid about 2.5k more this year than last year for my electricity. So that's how I analyze the report, but what else do I use my trends report for? Well, at the end of the financial year, I would always run a trends report to compare my actuals against my original budget. The question I'm answering there is how well did I go this year compared to what I thought I was going to do. So in column A, I'd set my actuals for this year. In column B, I would set my plan for this year. Well, my actuals for last year and my plan for last year, and I would compare the difference. I also use the variance report when I lock down my working plan or before I lock down my working plan or my budget at the beginning of the financial year. The question I'm answering there is, what is my budget realistic? And what I would do there is under column A, I'd set up my plan budget for next year as column A, and in column B, I'd put my actuals from last year or my actuals from a status quo year, and I'd make sure my budget for the coming year is realistic. I also use the variance report as the year progresses. I like to compare my actuals to my plan on a regular basis so I can compare how I've actually gone to how I thought I was going to do. And finally, I use my variance report if I've ever developed a scenario, a what-if budget of any kind. Say I wanted to buy I'm looking at buying my neighbour's block, I would compare my budget to buying my neighbour's block with the status quo budget to see how that new idea or scenario impacts on my bottom line. So next I want to show you the year-to-date variance report. Now this report is especially important if you're managing your operation carefully and you've got a credible budget. In that case, it possibly will be a default report that you'll use. So I set this up with my actuals from this financial year, and I compare it to my plan from this financial year. And then I need to select the month you've got the last full amount of data from. And I know in this database is up to date to August. So I'll select August and then I'll apply. So here on the left-hand side, you'll see we've got the information for August, and on the right, our year-to-date information. So here I've got my actual expenditure for August versus my planned expenditure for August. The variance or difference between my actual and planned expenditure for August and as a percent variance. And over here, I've got my actual spend year to date versus my budgeted spend year to date, the variance, and then the percent variance. So how do I use this report? Well, I like to look at the difference between my actuals and my planned for the month, and I identify any major over or unders. And if I find a significant over or under, I then move across to my year to date to see if a trend is emerging, or is it simply a timing issue? Now, at the beginning of a financial year, it's hard to see these trends as you've only got a few data points, but as the year progresses, it becomes more and more useful. It's okay to have 1 month of a major over or under, but if year to date you are significantly over or under in the same direction, then you should it's a potential concern and you might need to take action. So I'm just going to run through that quickly. I would look down here at my variance for my August. Now these are great. It looks like I've got an exceptionally good budget here. But if I'd found a major variance, I would come through and look to see if a trend is emerging by year to date. Now, it is too early to see a trend, but if I saw something like this, it would actually be cause for concern. Because what this is showing that I have actually spent 5.5K on my R&M this financial year to date, but I'd only budgeted to spend 2.2K year to date. So I've actually already spent 3.5K or more or less over what I had anticipated to do, and I'd be keeping an eye on this moving forward to make sure that a trend isn't emerging, that I'm not constantly overspending on my R&M budget. Now we also have an additional tool in our year-to-date variance report. It's called our year-to-date remaining budget. So if I go into my settings, I get the ability to select this text box here, and I will now have a new column. My year-to-date remaining column will now appear at the end of my report here. And what this tells me is what you've got left in your budget to spend to the end of the financial year. So if I go down here, this is telling me that for my wages, I've got nearly 73K left to spend on wages in the 24-25 financial year. Now, if this number had been positive, it would mean that I've already spent my budget for this financial year for wages. So that's also a very useful tool. Now I want to move to my trends report. Now with our trends report, it looks at macro trends. This compares my business against itself year on year or in other words, I'm looking at my business over time. Now, I use this report again at the beginning and the end of the financial year. At the beginning of the financial year, I use it to validate my new budget or working plan. I check my working plan makes sense based on the last 4 years of actual data. I also use this report at the end of the financial year. I compare this year's actuals against the last 4 years of actuals to see if there's been any disruption in trend. And if I find a disruption, I like to investigate it. Maybe it's just a simple coding error. And I do this investigation in my cash flow detail, which we've already talked about earlier. Now, I can also use my trends report if I have some scenario plans I want to review. How does this scenario look like compared to my last 4 years of actual data? How does the scenario impact on my bottom line? Once again, I need to set up my modal. In this case, I've got to first of all enter my start year, and this is the year I start counting back my 5 years worth of data. Now, I always tend to start with my last full year, and then I apply. Now, this is only a demonstration database. There's only 3 years of data in our demo, but with your farms, you'll have 5 years worth of data that you can compare against. And actually, if you've been with Farm Focus a long time, you can compare any 5 consecutive years of data. So you could look at 2000 to 2005 if that interests you. Now, go and take a look at the trend data on your farm. It is really interesting reading. Go and have a look to see how interest rates have changed on your farm over 5 years, or how your rates have changed over 5 years. It's highly worth going in and having a look at this trends report. It's got so many little gems in it. Now, the next reports I want to show you are our livestock reports. In Farm Focus, we've got 3 livestock reports. We've got our livestock summary report. This is your livestock grid of your working plan. Now, I'm not going to cover this today because it's got its own webinar at the beginning of a next calendar year. But we've also got our livestock reconciliation report, and this tracks the movement of stock throughout the year. Once again, I need to set it up with how I want to view it. But we actually have this extra selection here where we get the option to view the report by stock owned or stock on farm. Now, stock owned is stock you own regardless of its location, whereas stock on farm is stock on farm, again, regardless of whether or not you own it. Now, this is a relatively recent feature of Farm Focus because we've developed a new tool that allows grazing records to be captured correctly. So if you're primarily a grazer, or you've got a lot of stock on your farm that grazes off your farm for a period, go and check out our Help Centre resource on grazing to better understand how you can record your grazing correctly in Farm Focus. Now I'm going to apply this data. Now in this livestock reconciliation report, we've got our stock categories and our stock classes down the left-hand side. And then we've got our opening numbers and all our stock events along the top, and then our closing numbers. Now, in your databases, you'll also have your aged up, but this is the demonstration database. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly move to another database, and I want to show you the livestock trading report. Sorry, there it is. Now, the livestock trading report is a really useful report because this report shows the kilograms of carcass weight you produce on farm on an annual basis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to view this report with last year's actuals. Now, with this report, I'm going to again collapse it to a high level to do my initial review. Because this report at the top shows the changes in your opening and closing livestock numbers and the total value impact of this. So in this particular farm, you can see the closing numbers are smaller than the opening numbers. In fact, there were 111 sheep less. This is equivalent to 2,665 grams of carcass weight, and it's got a value of about 20k. I then move down to the production data of this particular farm, and I can quickly see that this farm produces 90 or just about 92,000 kilograms of carcass weight of sheep meat, because I'm only looking at sheep meat, which has a value of about 600k. And then I can move down here to my production on a per hectare basis. So on this particular farm, we're producing 122 kilograms of carcass weight per hectare of sheep meat, which equates to about $800 per hectare of sheep meat as produced on this farm. Now down here, we've got our summary of our stock rec, because it's important to keep track of any non-financial stock events, such as births and deaths, and the closing numbers of this obviously feed up until the closing numbers up here. Then further down, we have our other stock categories for our farm, and at the bottom, we've got our total farm production per hectare. So on this particular farm, it produced 129 kilograms of carcass weight per hectare. So note too, within this report, we've got another icon now up here, an adjustment icon. So if I was to click into here, I could change the number of hectares that I'm using as the basis for this report here, if I wish. And now I want to show you your economic farm surplus report. Now, this report allows you to compare your performance against yourself and industry standards. It's created by mapping the different KPI reporting groups of your farming business. It's GST exclusive. It's always based on a full year and an accrual view. So to set up the report, once again, I'm going to look at my actuals from last year. And because I'm a sheep and beef farm, I'm going to select meat and fibre production, and then I apply. Now, while I'm looking at last year's, I could always use this report to be future focused, and I could review my current working plan or any sort of scenario plan I wished as well. Now, before we review this report, it's important to note that all these columns will always be on when you first go into the report. What you need to do is turn off the columns associated with dairy. So go into the eye icon here and get rid of the dairy related columns. Now also, you can opt out to hide out of one or both of these sections. This allows you to share this report with, say, your shepherd without them seeing any of your personal data, such as your interest payments or your drawings or your tax. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to keep them on, and now I'm going to apply. Now at the top section, you'll see your opening and closing stock units and the percent change in your stock units, and then your percent missing and deaths. Now with your breeding percentages, they are calculated using the animals you opened with at the start of the financial year that can produce offspring. So your primary breeders are your percent lambs born divided by the opening number of mixed age ewes and two-tooths, whereas your secondary breeders are your percent of lambs born divided by your number of opening hoggets. Now, you can always change these numbers. If you don't want to use opening numbers, you can come once again into the adjustment icon up here, go into milking and breeding, and change these numbers. So, for example, on this farm, I only put the ram out to half my hoggets. So I'm just going to change that to half my hoggets, and now you'll see that that breeding percentage will change. So we also have our stocking rate. It's just taking a little bit of, so now that's gone up to 80%. We also have our stocking rate here, and we've got some basic metrics, our opening stock units by hectares and our closing per hectare. And now I'm going to move down to the main body of the report. On the left-hand side here, we've got our KPIs, and at the top here, we've got our revenue. Now, when I look at this report, I tend to come straight down here and look at my total revenue. So on this farm, it made about 700 revenue of 700K. And then I look at this revenue on a per hectare basis and a per stock unit basis. And then I look up here at the detail. So along here, you can see for my sheep, I got nearly 80% of my gross farm revenue came from my sheep meat. And then if I want to, I can drill down in more detail by using my drop down arrows. And so look, if I look under my lamb sales, my gross farm revenue from my lamb sales provide 70% more or less of my gross farm revenue. And what's interesting to note here under my sires, it's a negative number, and that must mean I've purchased more sires than I've sold. Because remember, revenue is your sales plus other income minus your purchases adjusted for a change in stock quantity. So that's why those numbers are negative. And that brings me through here to our adjustments. Now, our livestock adjustments are a really important part of this report. They show the change in stock quantity can make a big difference to your revenue. If your closing numbers are less than your opening numbers, then your bank account may look great. But just remember, you don't have those dollars in the paddock anymore to sell. And this is why the adjustments are so important. Your EFS shows you your true farm profitability. Now you can see up here in the adjustments icon how we calculate our adjustments. Now if your closed stock are greater than your opening stock, then you're going to have a positive adjustment in your EFS. And if your closing stock are less than your opening stock, you'll have a negative adjustment. So here I've got, as we already know, we've got our closing stock were less, so I've got a negative adjustment here. Now in this report, what we find is a lot of farmers like to set a range of dollar value per hectare that they want to produce. So in this farm, their revenue per hectare was $934. So we see a lot of farmers setting a range of what they would like that number to be. And now I'm going to move down to my farm expenses. And once again, I tend to go right to the bottom and see what my total farm expenditure is. And then I like to look at it on a per hectare basis, as a percent of my gross farm revenue, and on a per stock unit basis. I then like to look at this report line by line. Look here, for my animal health, per stock unit, my animal health is costing me $4.61. 3.5% of my gross farm revenue is used up by my animal health costs, and I'm spending nearly $33 a hectare on animal health, which for the full 12 months cost me nearly $24,500. Now I can compare these numbers here in this report year on year against myself, or I can compare it to industry standards. So to get that industry standard data or that benchmarking data, I can go to the Beef and Lamb website, and if I search under benchmarking tool, I'll be able to find data relevant to my region and my farm type there to compare my performance against. But you also may be a member of a discussion group that has its own benchmarking data. I also find that I like to set a goal for the total farm, my total farm expenses as a percent of my gross farm revenue. I find this is a really good metric. And the other metric I also like to look at again is my total farm expenses per hectare. And I again try and make a goal of what I want that to be about at every financial year. So now I'm going to move down to my adjustments. Now what we find is our farm consultants use these adjustments most for when they're doing for benchmarking purposes. So if you want to compare your farm against other farms in your discussion group, often our farm consultants make these adjustments. These adjustments help to calculate, though, a true economic farm surplus. But if you're using this data just to compare yourself year on year, you can leave these blank. But if you want to compare yourself to other farms, it might be important to consider adding in an adjustment. So I just want to run you through quickly what these adjustments are. You can obviously put in a depreciation adjustment. You can add a fertilizer adjustment, and this allows you to separate out any capital applications of fertilizer. You can add a management adjustment. Now, a management adjustment is the one we see most often. So if you're an owner-operator and you pay yourself drawings rather than a wage, you can add a management wage adjustment to standardize what you would have paid someone else to do the same work. And finally, we've got an R&M adjustment. And again, this is used to separate out any capital development expenditure. Now, if you want to do an adjustment, what you need to do is come up here into the adjustments, other adjustments, and add a figure in here. And then we're coming down to our economic farm surplus, or our EBIT-R. Now, this is an important number because it shows how your farm is performing, excluding your ownership structure. So at this point, it doesn't matter whether you lease or own your farm, whether you've got a huge mortgage or no mortgage at all. You're going to be able to compare yourself to others. And we also find this is the number that our banks use often to compare our performance to others in their portfolio. Now remember, this figure can also be called your EBIT-R, your earnings before interest, tax and rent. Now from here, we take off our interest and rent. Now our interest and rent can be very varied between farms, but then we're left with our operating surplus. And our operating surplus is basically, or deficit, is basically your taxable profit or loss. Now, from your operating surplus, you take away your non-operating expenses, such as your taxation, any principal payments, your drawings and assets purchased and sold, and you're left with your overall performance. So that's the EFS in a nutshell. It's an incredibly powerful report. So if you haven't already gone and looked at your own EFS, I would highly encourage you to do so. So that is about all I wanted to cover this afternoon, but I want to finish with a few reminders. I have covered a lot of information. If you want to have a refresh or deeper dive into any of these reports, come into our help centre here and search under in the individual report that you're interested in, because there is a help centre resource on each of the reports. Now remember, you cannot break anything. You are not changing any of the data in any way when you're reviewing your reports. So come in and have a go. Now you can manipulate these reports to view what you're interested in at any time. You do that by the way you set it up on the modal and by using the filter and view functions once you're in the report. And the more you experiment with these reports, the better you will become at manipulating them, interpreting them, and finding the nuggets of gold relevant to your business. Be aware, though, if you do put on a filter in one report and you move to another report, that filter will persist, so you'll need to turn it off. Now, if when you go into your reports, they don't look like the ones that I showed you, remember back to the basics. Go back and check whether your code structure is correct. Check that you're consistently coding your invoices and that you're adding all that quality information with your quantities, descriptions, and notes. And also check whether or not you've entered that physical farm data. So what I want to do now is go back and reflect on our aims. So we covered, if you recall, at the very beginning, we talked about our cash flow detail report. This report drilled into the detail and assumptions behind our cash flow grid. Then we went and talked about our variance report. Remember, we compared two sets of data. We answered questions like, how well did you go this year compared to last year? Then we looked at our variance report. And we used our variance report if we were managing our budget closely. It showed how we went this month and year to date using your actuals compared to your budget. Then we looked at our trends report. That showed macro level trends on your farm for 5 consecutive years. This report allowed you to compare your business against itself over time. Then we quickly looked at the livestock reconciliation report, which looked at stock movements over the financial year. And then we moved on to our livestock trading report, which showed the kilograms of carcass weight you produced on your farm. And finally, we looked at the EFS, or the Economic Farm Surplus report, which showed both our physical and financial performance of our farm at a KPI level. And it contained really valuable metrics on our performance that allowed us to compare against ourselves and against industry standards. So finally, I just want to end on this slide. We are offering a new service at Farm Focus. So if you want further helping hand or a deeper dive into your own databases, we've got you covered. For $3.99 plus Gist, you can get a 2-hour one-to-one session with an expert from Farm Focus who will undertake a full health check of your database. And this includes things like updating your farm codes and making sure your section level is correct to get the most out of your reports, ensuring you've got all the information entered into your stock codes and you've entered your physical farm data into Farm Focus, and they'll also check that your stock rec is tidy. So if you're interested in the service, get out your phone, open up the camera and hover over this QR code, and that will take you straight into your ability to register